Right, how we doing? Last session, we're nearly there. After this, have some beers and stuff. Right, so thank you for coming to the last session of the day. I'm not going to bore you, there'll be no interactive stuff. Let me move that. Is that better? No? I'll hold it, it's fine. So welcome to my session on why you need to migrate to Salesforce Flow. And before I start, I just want to give a big thanks to all the sponsors. Obviously, events like today can't happen without our sponsors, so a massive thank you to them and letting it happen. There we go. Right, so a little bit about me. So my name's Andrew Cook, that's me. I'm the Salesforce technical instructor at Salesforce Ben, where I've been since September last year, so just over 6 months. So I've been working in the ecosystem for 12 years now, where I started as an end user. I'm now 13 times certified and a Trailblazer mentor. I'm also a London boy, so I grew up 6 miles from here, so anyone that's going to or has been to the World Tour, I literally grew up down the road from there. And my last non-specific Salesforce role was, I don't know what way it is, down wherever Old Street is. That was my last role before I moved into an admin role. Cool, so the agenda for this session. So I'm going to start with the retirement of Workflow Rules and Process Builder before going over what Salesforce Flow is. Some native tools that are available from Salesforce to help with our migration strategies. The different things that we need to think about within them strategies. I've got some free resources for you to take advantage of as well. And that's the agenda. Right, so let's start from the beginning. So in 2021 at Dreamforce, Patrick Stokes announced that Workflow Rules Process Builder is going to be retired. They put the timeline in place, which is here, and we're about halfway through that at the moment. So at the moment, where we are is that all Workflow Rules and Process Builders still work. They still work as expected. That being said, the tools aren't being enhanced in any way. So if you're not building new automations in Flow Builder, you probably need to start now. So in the Winter 22 release, we had workflow rules being switched off, so you can no longer create new workflow rules. And this is where we are at the moment. So as of the Summer 23 release, the ability to create new process builders is being turned off as well. So they've been quite strict on the timeline, and they've kept to it, unlike in other products where they move things about. So what is Salesforce Flow? So it's the Salesforce automation tool now. So it allows you to build complex business solutions using clicks, not code. So it's it's the most powerful automation tool that there is, and it gives you a lot of the same sort of powers as Apex. So there's many types of flows available, such as record triggered flows, screen flows, auto launch flows, scheduled triggered flows. But today I'm going to be focusing on the record trigger flows, mostly because those are the ones that need to be migrated from, or those are what process builders and workflow rules will migrate to, I should say. Right, is Flow Builder a developer tool? So there's been a lot of discussion around this. So when I refer to it as a developer tool, I don't mean that only developers use it. What I mean by it is, so as an admin, I've used things like the developer console, code builder, VS Code. I'm not a developer, but I've been using those tools. So what I mean by Flow being a developer tool is that it uses concepts like variables, like collections, like loops, being able to run asynchronously, being able to delete records, being able to trigger when a record is deleted, and as of the current beta, being able to create HTTP callouts. So these are concepts that previously you would never, workflow rules, process builder, you never really had to even learn what these meant. But now, with all of these, that's why I see Flow Builder as more of a developer tool. Right, so there is a few native tools that Salesforce have provided to help with our migration. So they started with the workflow rule migration tool. This is pretty basic, to be honest. It allows you to migrate workflow rules one-to-one, so one workflow rule will migrate straight into one flow. They then brought out the process builder migration tool, which is a lot more advanced. And the really cool thing about this is that with a process builder, you have the various nodes. This allows you to select individual nodes within your process and migrate those in a way that you can't do with the initial workflow rule migration tool. And then finally, we've got the Flow Trigger Explorer, which allows us to set the order in which our flows run, kind of similar to how Process Builder worked with the various nodes in certain orders. And with that, I'm going to give you a quick, it's a demo, but I'm calling it showtime because everyone says demo. And also, I'm just showing you what it does. Cool, so here we are so this is the Migrate to Flow tool. It's easy to find, just search Flow in the setup window. And you can see that so it's broken down into the different types. So you've got your workflow rules or your processes. And it's really straightforward to use. So all you do is hit the radio button next to the automation you want to migrate. Hit the migrate button. And that's it, it's migrated. And the cool thing about it as well is you've got the test in Flow Builder button, which will open it straight up into Flow when it decides to. And here you can see exactly what the flow is doing. The workflow rule migration tool doesn't work with all workflows. So here I've got two examples where an account is being assigned to a specific user. So these, if I try to migrate this, I'll get an error message because where it is updating the owner ID field, that's something that the tool just can't handle. So you can't use it for all your migrations. And then here, if I do the same with the process, so you can see that you've got the various nodes that you can select, migrate to Flow, and the exact same thing. There is also, where is it? So with the I think it's only with the workflow migration, is that there's also a button to switch the migrations. So it gives you the option. So the one button will deactivate your workflow rule and activate the flow. And I'll leave that there. Oh, and before I forget, the Flow Trigger Explorer. So that is just within the flow setup. You see it there just at the top. And then here you can see, so this is on the case record whenever it's created, and you've got all the flows that are there, and you can edit the order as well, so you can kind of have your flows running in whatever order you need them to, which is something that you couldn't really do previously. So what do we need to think about with our migration? So first is documentation, then our order of execution, how the current automation is being launched, what objects it interacts with, what are the actions from the automations, your org limits, are there any other tools to consider, and finally testing. So documentation. The key with documentation is to keep it as simple as possible. So only document what you need to. Less is more as long as you've got the key points. So when I've been going through these sort of projects in the past, these are the sort of things that I've mapped out. So the name of the automation, the object it runs on, if it's a process builder, the different nodes, what's triggering the automation, the actions that fire off the back of the automation, and any notes to consider. So for things like, for notes, you could do things like this automation is primarily used for sales team, things like that. The order of execution. So when a record is saved in Salesforce, it goes through all of this to save the record to the database. So at the moment, so for example, you may have a workflow rule that updates a field on a particular record. That field update could then trigger an assignment rule or an auto response rule. So you need to be very careful when you're doing your migration, because if you was to move your workflow rule to a before save flow, you can see that that's now earlier in the order of execution, and it may affect how the assignment rule or the auto response rule runs. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're doing your migration. And it's always a good idea to use this as kind of a map, just to make sure that things are working, or that you're planning for them to work how they need to. Next, so how is the automation launched? So these are the different ways that your flows can launch. So you can have every time it's created, edited, and so on. So what I have found is that it can be a good idea, depending on your strategy, is to group your automations into these sections. So for example, you could have an account flow for every time an account's created, and a separate one for every time it's created and meets the criteria. So what objects does it interact with? So this is really important because it determines where in the order of execution it fires. So like I said previously, with a before save trigger, so if it updates a single object, so for example, if you had an opportunity when it's closed, when you set the stage to close one, set the close date to today, that will be a before update flow. If you changed it to if the same update then triggers an update on the account record, that will then, because it's on now dealing with multiple objects, that's now an after update flow. So that's something that's really important because, as I said, it determines where in the order of execution your flows will fire. So what are the actions? So with flow, there's a lot of actions that you can do. So you can create records, update, delete, launch flow, launch subflows, and fire flow actions. So there's a lot more power in Flow Builder than in Process Builder and in workflow rules. So when you're thinking about your migration, bear in mind that what you previously had in a load of single workflows could now be done in a single flow. So org limits. So this is something that I don't think many admins take into account. I know I haven't in the past, especially with workflow rules and Process Builder. But there's two types of org limits that I want to talk about. So we've got SOQL queries and DML statements. So example of a SOQL query is in your flow, one get element will be one SOQL query, and one create element will be one DML statement. So I know that these numbers seem quite small, but when you take into account that these are going by the same rules as Apex, you need to be mindful of the limits, because where it's also running with the same rules as Apex, it's running in parallel with Apex. So you may have triggers that are working as well on the same objects to the same limits, and you just need to make sure that they work how they need to work. And always document, as I've said before. So I think as well, if you can kind of estimate the sort of queries that your flow could potentially hit, I think that will be really, really beneficial, especially if you're in collaboration with a developer team, and they're obviously off doing all their Apex and working in the same way. So, are there any tools to consider? So, especially us admins tend to be quite lazy. So, if we can find a tool that will do something for us, we'll go and get it. So, these are a few of the tools that I've used in the past. So, declarative rollup, mass action scheduler, rollup helper. One thing you need to bear in mind is that all of these behind the scenes are running in Apex. So they've all got classes, they've all got triggers. So again, you need to make sure that, referring back to the order of execution, that a field update is working in the same way after you've migrated to it into a flow as it did previously if it was working with a workflow rule or process. Testing. So how many admins feel like this when testing flows comes out? Because I know it's a new thing, really, testing flows. We've never done that before, and yes, Salesforce did rip off the Simpsons meme. I didn't do this, don't worry. Salesforce did it, so any legal action, that's on them, not me. Yeah, so testing flows. So why should you test your flows? So there's a really simple reason for this, is that as I've spoken about, it's kind of a developer tool now. Same rules, it can do the same things as Apex. Apex you can't just create in production. You can't just create a class and trigger and it just work. But you can with a flow. You can create it in production and just let it run. Should you? Probably not. So there are a couple of tools that you can use now. So we've got the flow debug tool, which is built into your flows, which I'm gonna show you both of these in a second. So you've got the flow debug tool, and you can create your tests either manually within Flow Builder, or you can do it from the debug tool. So second show time. So if I go into our flow that we've already got, so here you can see at the top we've got the debug button. So here it will let me select an opportunity. I can select if I want the test to, or I want to debug it either when it's created or updated. So I know that this flow is supposed to run when the stage is set to closed one. So I'm going to set that here. And I'm also, so you can see that here as well, it's automatically set to run in rollback mode. So what that means is that anything that this does, it doesn't commit to the database, it rolls back. So it just shows you if it's working or not. So if I select run here, you can see that it's gone down, so you can see the path that it goes down. And then here you can see exactly what's happened with your flow. So it's a really good way of debugging and also documenting if you want to document them as well. And then from here, you've also got the convert to test button. So I can convert this directly into a test. And the really cool thing about this is that with your tests in Flow Builder, when you create them and save them in Flow Builder, if you push your flows through your environments, the tests push with them. So in the past, when I've been testing, I've had to create data in sandboxes, I've had to test them manually. You don't need to do that anymore. And as well, if I go back to edit flow and view tests, so all of your tests will show here. And I think, when I checked this morning, I think you can have up to 200 tests per flow. So yeah, it's quite a lot. I don't think you'll need 200, but it's there if you need it. Cool, so here are some free resources that we've got. So on the Salesforce Ben courses team, we've got the Migrate to Flow course. As part of that, we've got a couple of templates what will help you document your current migrations. And then course, there's Trailhead. There's so many trails and modules on Trailhead now for learning Flow. I've lost count at even the amount of super badges that there are on Flow now. So in summary, you need to know your org. So you almost need to be OCD with your org. You need to know everything. So all of your objects, all of your automations, installed packages, any tools, the Apex that's running ideally, and knowing your org will help you migrate your automations better. Map out your processes. Realistically, people should be documenting their processes anyway. I know way back it probably wasn't a done thing, but I think more and more now people need to start mapping them, and this is a good starting point where we're going to be migrating everything anyway, so you may as well map them as you go. So refer to the order of execution. So it's an easy thing to use just as a map, just as a guide. Say for each automation that you've got, just check this is what it does, this is where it runs. Okay, if I migrate it, okay, it's going to go there. Will it still work? This is something that I found really useful, is by migrating by object. So I've been in organisations before where on the opportunity we've had a process builder that's got 80 nodes, but on the lead on the lead object it's maybe 6 nodes. So start with the lead object, find your feet, get used to what you're doing, and then go from object by object. And it's also a better way to communicate with the business. So if you're dealing with cases, you can let support know that if there's any issues, this could be the reason why, and you can communicate it that way. And finally, test everything. So you don't want to break anything when you're doing your migration, so get into a state of just testing your flows. Obviously, all of the tools are there now to help us test, so we need to make use of them. And that is everything. Are there any questions?
So, could you explain what the purpose of the tests is? Why do we need to save them, and what are they for?
So the reason for the testing is it's in the exact same way for as Apex. So it's to test that the flow is doing what it's supposed to. I think the testing, in theory, the testing in Flow Builder is better suited than in Apex, purely because I know a lot of developers that will test to make sure that their code works, not necessarily that the code is doing what it needs to do. Whereas here, because it's more declarative and you're dealing with the records, you can see if it's working, how you need it to, and go from there.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
Is it best practice to have one flow per object?
Yeah, this has been spoken about a lot. Previously, it was recommended, but I don't think it is anymore. It depends on your org instance, I think, whatever works best for you. Saying that, with some additions, there are limitations on how many flows you can have. So I don't know how many people that will apply to these days, but if that is the case, I think it's probably best to speak to your account executive on what they would recommend.
Okay, yeah, so you mentioned that it's like the best to know your org. Kind of like inherited full organization as a single admin, as a beginner admin 2 years ago, and we have tons of processes and workflows. So do you know any recommendations where to start and how to start to migrate those? Because like I'm not sure I have the full knowledge of what's actually in the system.
For that I would recommend starting small and starting with what you know. So there'll be processes that you know better than others, objects that you know better than others. I would say to start with them, and then just expand from there. And then as you're documenting as well as you go on, you'll almost piece the org together in that way.
Hi, thank you for the session. I just have one question in line with what he mentioned. So as a best practice, we say that there should be only 3 flows per object or something like that. So when we talk about using the migrating tool, it is like 1-to-1, right? One workflow will convert into one flow. So in that case, it would be like too many flows for someone who is a beginner and who is going to transition from being into workflow to flow. So is there something that is being planned in the future to have something more collaborative in terms of object to have it migrated? Or
That's a
it
really
is
good
just
question.
going to be user who is going
Yeah,
to
natively from Salesforce, I don't think so. I don't think they're building, I could be wrong, but I don't think they're building anything for that. So I don't like the workflow rule migration tool, because you should really be, like in my example where I had the different workflows, really they should be migrated into a single flow. So the one-to-one migration I don't like, because it's not really the best way to architect the flows. But there are a load of tools on the App Exchange that can analyze and help with that sort of thing as well.
It's just about learning it more better.
Cool. Well, if there's no more questions, thank you for coming, and enjoy the last little bit of London's Calling.
Eden with Salesforce is a game changer, an easy-to-use financial package that provides advanced features that you simply can't get from Xero or QuickBooks. It's based on a simple truth that integrating your finance and CRM systems on Salesforce is efficient. All your data's in one place. There are no integrations. Dashboards deliver your reporting without complicated Excel spreadsheets. Native Salesforce automates the mundane. Implementation is quick, in one VAT quarter, and minimal training is required. There are 3 versions: free forever, economy, and business class, which adds more sophisticated features and multi-companies. And it's all backed up with a 12-month, no argument, money-back guarantee. Thank you for listening.